I've really been passionate about and excited about talking to lots of different people in professional services and accounting recently. So welcome. If you have any questions, like Catherine said, please drop them in the chat and we'll go ahead and get started. So in today's session, the goal is to take a look at how to build an advisory practice. And this is something that has been such a hot topic recently. You know, we've heard a lot over the course of the past 10 years that consulting's the way to go, and consulting is how you make money, and you want to get away from compliance-based clients and get into, you know, the advisory role. Well, there's a couple things that happen when firms try to make that transition from a compliance-based client base to advisory services. And really, there's one main mistake that accounting firms make that really holds them back from making a successful transition to advisory services. And this is the fact that they underestimate what type of transition this is going to be. They underestimate how many changes they're going to have to make in their firm. They're going to underestimate what they're going to expect of their staff and everything else. So really, the biggest mistake that I see firms make is that they say they want to add advisory services and they look at it as just adding a new product or service. And it's very different than that. So when you are looking to transition to an advisory-based accounting practice, it really is going to be a new way of working. And this is where I've seen the biggest struggles is firms get excited, they want to do it, they hire somebody like myself or someone else in the industry to come in and train their staff. They want training on how to cross-sell their current clients, how to uncover opportunities, how to add these services and become, and I don't want to say more of a salesperson because that's not really what it is, but if you want to become an advisor to your clients, you have to find new ways of servicing them. You have to build a relationship with them where they see you as a trusted advisor. You have to be able to ask questions, and you have to be able to really dig deep into those relationships in order to get to a point where you're an advisor and you're offering them services above and beyond compliance. So they have us come in, do all this training, they get excited, we go through everything we can, and everyone's ready to go and super excited because relationships are more fun than just coming in and doing the work and moving on. So they go through the training, everybody's excited, and then they go back and everyone reverts back to their old way of working. They revert back to the same billable hours. They revert back to the work and billable focused environment. And if you don't change the way you think and the way you work, then it's not going to work when adding an advisory practice. It's not like we're coming in and adding, bookkeeping services, or we're adding compilation services. It truly is a new way of working. So there's two key steps that you really need to keep in mind when you're transitioning to an advisory practice. First is going to be mindset, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but advisory services and advisory practices take a completely different mindset as compared to one that's built, transactionally on those compliance-based services. So we'll talk about that in just a second. And then the second piece to this is it actually takes the right clients. And this is one of the biggest changes that you'll have to make when you start making this transition, because you can't just take any client that comes in the door. Because if you're an advisor to someone and you're giving them advice based on your expertise and experience, you can't do that for everybody. You have to find the right clients that fit your expertise and fit your the value that you provide. So we'll talk about that in just a second. It's important to hone in on that value so that you can find your ideal client so that you can provide the level of service that's expected from advisory services. So with that being said, we'll actually jump into our first polling question. Interested to find out where everybody is in this process, and I'll tell you what I hear from others as soon as we get to the end of the poll. All right, looks like polling question number 1 is up. Where are you in the process of building an advisory practice? That's all I do. I'm in the beginning stages and it's taking off. I'm in the beginning stages and I'm struggling. I know I need to, but I haven't started yet, or not applicable. And I apologize to everybody out there because I do have the sniffles. It has been crazy here, and we've got some allergies going on. I was sneezing my head off earlier. So I'm still trying to recover from that. I don't know if anybody else does that when they sneeze, but it's a downhill spiral if I sneeze once. Whoops. All right, so it looks like the vast majority are in the beginning stages in terms of where you are with building an advisory practice. The one person out there that said that it's taking off, I'm super excited for you, and I want to hear all about it. All right, so we'll go ahead and close this. So let's start with mindset. Mindset truly is the number one roadblock for accountants when you move into an advisory practice. Now, I'm not one of those mindset gurus. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning that was like, just manifest it into the universe. And I'm like, I don't know that I necessarily believe in all of that, just speaking it out there that you're going to get all these advisory clients and they just show up. I don't think it really works like that. But the mindset that I'm talking about is the mindset that you should be charging for your value, and you should be charging for your advice and your expertise. I mean, by nature, accountants are hesitant to do this because historically it's really been expected of our industry. It's funny because attorneys, they don't care it's not they don't care, but that they go in and they charge for every phone call, they charge for every email. Any advice that they give and any conversations they have, they charge for it. And if you ask an attorney to work with you, you expect it. And accountants, we've just done a really good job of setting ourselves up for being helpful and wanting to really help, our clients in whatever way that we can. So if they call, we don't charge them. If they email us, we don't charge them. But we're spending a lot of time providing client service, and we just feel like we can't charge for it. And so it came out a big time when I was talking to a handful of firms as we were right in the middle of the craziness of the pandemic, and everyone's trying to figure out their loans and trying to figure out how they're going to stay in business. And some of you may know, some of you may not. My husband's a CPA, so is my dad, and so am I, but luckily I'm not in public practice anymore. But they were in the heat of this. And I mean, my husband worked longer hours during this time helping clients with their loans and everything else than he normally even would during tax season. And so I start talking to some of the practitioners, not him, because we don't talk about these things, but he doesn't like for me to coach him, but other practitioners that are doing this. And they said, I feel awful, charging someone $1,000 right now. I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort, trying to figure out which loan was best for them, how to help them apply, get their information together, do everything in my power to help them survive this. But I just feel awful sending them a bill right now because I know it's a horrible time. And I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that, and I totally understand, and there's ways around that. But my thought process is on this is was that $1,000 that you're billing them, was that the difference in them surviving this storm? Was that the difference in them being able to keep their doors open? Was that the difference in them not having to close their dream forever? Because if that's what you did for them, it's worth way more than $1,000. And if they don't have the money to pay it right now, you can work that out down the road. You can figure out how to do that, but you don't want to set the precedent that I feel bad because you're struggling right now, even though I invested a ton of my time and resources into helping you survive. I'm just not going to charge you for that. I feel bad. So they see the value in it because they called you and they asked you for help. They couldn't figure out the loan by themselves, or even if they could, they probably knew they couldn't do it right, or they weren't in a place where they could spend the time to figure it out because they were trying to keep their doors open. So they called you because they saw value in you helping them with that. You have to see that as well as the accountant in order to embrace this advisory model. Okay. So thinking about, compliance versus advisory services, it's really important to understand, where the lines are drawn between compliance, between consulting, between advisory services, because there's a lot of confusion when it comes to consulting and advisory. But it really all starts with the precedent you set for all of your services. So if you are building a compliance-based practice just on price, and we all know that technology has come a long way, in the last 15, 20 years, and so much of those compliance services are now automated, or technology makes them much more efficient. And so the price of these services and the inferred value that your clients feel like they get has gone down and down and down over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. And so what people are struggling with now is they get these clients that they're winning just based on price. And when you're attracting that type of client, they're only going to stay with you until they find someone else to do it cheaper. And that gets you in a vicious cycle of just lowering your price. So that's where the transition to advisory services comes into play. And it really has to do with building relationships. And that's where accountants are right now that I talk to. They want those relationships. They went into accounting because they wanted to help businesses. They wanted to make an impact, not just crank out tax returns or audits or whatnot. And so they want to get in a place where they have these clients that come to them for advice. And that's where your advisory services come into play. It's all about figuring out, how do we build this relationship so that we are delivering value, our clients value us, we're not in a price war with people down the road, and we're doing something that we enjoy doing and we're profitable at it, and we don't have that churn and burn mentality. And that's really where we want to get. And the other clarification that I do want to talk about a little bit here is the difference between consulting services and advisory services. And it's an important clarification to make because this is going to make an impact on your success as we go down the line. So a lot of people hear this and they think, oh, well, I'll do advisory services. I advise my clients. But there's a big difference in advisory services being ongoing. These are recurring clients and you're advising them throughout the year or on an ongoing basis. A consulting engagement is more of a one-off engagement. So an example of this, let's say someone comes to you and says, hey, look, I'm starting a business. I'd really like your help with figuring out what type of entity I need to set up. I really need some help with the business formation side of it. If you go back, do your research, help them figure out what they need to do, set them on their way and get them set up, then that's a consulting engagement. That's a one-time engagement. It's good. It is about relationships. It is about providing value. It is about providing advice. But the difference is, to build an advisory practice, you want that to be ongoing revenue based on a relationship. So you could take that conversation and say, absolutely, I'd love to help you set up your new business. We actually have a new business formation package that we offer that covers the next year, covers the whole first year of you being in business. It includes the business formation and all of that guidance. It includes, your bookkeeping and financial, services on a whatever basis you decide. It includes so many sessions where we sit down and go over benchmarking, KPIs, and profitability, and where you can improve things, and so much consulting over the course of the year. And what that does is it then says, look, we know that this is going to go beyond you just setting up a new business. All new businesses have these questions and have these concerns over the course of the first year. So what we do is we help businesses, navigate the whole first year of business, and we do it by, getting a good handle on the finances, making sure we understand your profitability inside and out, and help set you up for the most success over the course of the next year. That then turns into ongoing revenue that you have with that client, and it helps you build that relationship. So when you're thinking about advisory services, you want to think about how to make this work long-term and into a relationship. And this is all done based on value. You have to start with your value. You got to think about it this way. You have to position yourself as a trusted advisor. And in order to do that, you have to know what you bring to the table. If you don't know how you're going to make a difference in the life or the business of your client, they're not going to either. And your value typically comes from three areas: your experience, your expertise, and your education. So let's say that maybe you have 10 to 15 years working specifically with healthcare practices. Well, you're going to have a unique perspective and valuable insight on what makes those healthcare practices successful. You've been exposed to all the best practices, and you can help your healthcare clients run a more profitable practice. Same goes for maybe you've served on a whole bunch of nonprofit boards, and you can help nonprofits become more efficient with their fundraising activities, or help them build a better network. It all is a combination of what you've done and what you bring to the table. And that's where your value is going to come into play, and your sweet spot's going to be where people are actually going to pay you what you deserve for this advice. So what I want everybody to do after this session today is to think about this and really think about your value. Think about what your clients get out of your relationship based on your experience, your expertise, and your education, and why they would choose you over somebody else, because that's really the backbone of all of this. Once you have that information, that's when you can really start thinking about your advisory services. And people get into this not just because it's more profitable, right? I mean, that's the goal, is having more profitable clients, but it also puts you in that authoritative advisor position where they're going to think of you first. And that's really what you want, is to get away from all the technology driven clients that are just concerned about price and how fast you can do it, and can somebody else down the street do it. It's all about embracing the relationship, and it's all about embracing your conversations with your clients, and moving away from the thought of, oh, I'm going to sell them more services, or I need to make them pay me more money, because that's what advisory services are. It's about helping. So it's about really taking a step back and thinking about how you can help your clients and build that relationship, so that when they do need something, or when they do have a question, you're the first call that they make because you are their trusted advisor. So to make this transition, there's a couple things that you need to think of from a firm perspective. Talked about the fact that, you know, a lot of this falls back on making sure that you make these changes and embrace this after you decide you're going to do it and go through different types of training. And one of the things that you really have to think about is your leadership. And I see this struggle a lot in firms, is that the leadership, they don't necessarily have someone in place that has this type of experience, and they're not embracing the mindset themselves, but they're expecting everybody else to. And it's not out of that they don't want to embrace it, and it's not that they don't, you know, that they think it doesn't apply to them. It's just a lot of times these leaders have built client bases and have built relationships and referral networks, and they just don't want to make those types of changes, but they expect the staff to start thinking in a different way. So, you know, one of the biggest recommendations that I have is to make sure your leadership either has experience with an advisory practice, or make sure you're embracing it with your staff and getting into the same groove and thought process as what you're asking others to do. The other piece to this is, as you make this transition, leadership needs to be supportive of their employees. So not only are employees going to have to still do the same technical job that they did before you started doing advisory services, but you really have to empower those employees to dig deeper and to develop relationships. Your staff are the ones that see this data day to day. They're in the information that your client sends, and they need to be able to take a step back and think differently about the information they're looking at. They need to be able to ask questions of the clients, or give the questions to you to ask the clients. But in order to look at the clients differently from a different lens, and, you know, see ways that you can help them, that it's going to change the way they work. And truth be told, it's going to slow them down a little bit. Whether they're having conversations or thinking critically, it's different than just getting the information, getting it in, getting it out. Information in, information out, which is what we're trained to do right now in order to keep realization rates high and make sure that everyone's doing what they need to do and getting their billable hours. Some of that may fall a little bit when you start this process, because you're asking people to work differently. And so leadership has to be supportive, and not just supportive, but encourage that type of behavior. Because what's going to happen is, if you start looking at your clients in a different perspective, you're going to uncover opportunities that are going to well cover the time it took to have that conversation, or the time it took to look at the clients differently. The other piece to this is, you're going to have to think a little differently on hiring. As important as it is to have the right leadership in place, it's going to be important for you to have the right staff in place. And you're always going to have technically strong staff, right? You're always going to have people that are really, really good at the work. But if your goal is to move to an advisory practice, then part of this is going to be making sure you get the right people in place that are naturally inquisitive, and they want to build those relationships, and they're looking at clients differently. That's not traditionally what accounting firms look for when they're hiring someone, but you want to kind of take a step back and think about who you're hiring, and do they have the ability to look at the clients differently? Do they have the ability to have those conversations, dig deeper, and try to build those relationships and find new ways to help the clients? Because the only way you're going to sell advisory services is if you can help your clients eliminate a problem or achieve a goal. And you're not going to figure out what those things are without a conversation. So as you're going through the hiring process and you're thinking about, you know, who you're going to put into place for an advisory practice, make sure that you're looking for people who are naturally inquisitive and that are very relationship driven, because they're going to help you make this a success long term, in addition to those that are very technically sound. And if you find that magical unicorn that is both, you scoop that person up and you pay them well, and you make sure you never let them go, because that is definitely, they're out there, but it's not everybody that walks through the door. So with that said, that brings us to polling question number 2. I see that we have a question in chat. Oh, and I can't get to it when the poll's open, so I'll grab it in a second. Polling question number 2. Which of the following struggles do you have with mindset? So only pick one, I think. I find it hard to charge people for advice. My staff aren't naturally inquisitive. I've not nailed down my value. 3 big things that have a big impact on where you go in an advisory practice. Catherine, do we have most people voted by now? Oh, all right. I love this. I've not nailed down my value is top of the list. And that's normal. I mean, I hear that from so many people. We have a test group in the prospecting and lead nurture boot camp that we've got going on right now, and a new one starting in August. And I'll tell you more about that later. But the whole first part of this is nailing down your value. And I don't know how many conversations we've had going back and forth on what is it that you provide. And a lot of people start with their deliverables. And I'm like, your financial advice or your finances and financial statements, they can get from anybody. So how is that valuable to them? So this is a big one. I'm happy to help if anybody wants to have that conversation later, but that definitely is a big one. Staff aren't inquisitive, totally normal. And I find it hard to charge people for advice. You are not alone. Not alone. All right, perfect. It looks like we had a response into the chat from the last polling question, Catherine. So I don't know if you're taking those down. All right. Let's see if I can get this to go to the next slide. There we go. All right. So mindset is the first piece of the puzzle, which means clients are the second piece to this. And finding the right types of clients is so incredibly important to building an advisory practice. Because if you are selling your value and your expertise as an advisor, then you can't be a jack of all trades, because you can't be an expert in everything. It's just the way it is. So the best way to build a long-term, successful, profitable advisory practice is to figure out the right clients that fit the value you provide and get those clients in the door, which I know is very different than what a lot of people think to do when it comes to business development, because you're not told that in an accounting practice. So I love this image of who is your ideal client, because you've got this beautiful flower off to the left that is perfect and you just love it, and every time you see that flower, you're just happy and it's fulfilling and everything, and that's your ideal client. You have those people that, I hope you have at least one, where you think, oh my gosh, I just love this person. I could work with them forever. This is magical. I want to keep these people around. And then you have your not so ideal clients who I'm sure you've said, oh, this client is so frustrating. I really wish I did not have to deal with their work. Maybe they're needy, but they're price sensitive. Maybe maybe you have to write down a ton on their bill and you have to do a bunch of work for them and they're just very frustrating. Maybe it's the work is way outside of your area of expertise, and so it's hard to provide the right level of service, but they've been a client for so long that you're just trying to do your best to service them. Well, if you're going to make the transition into advisory services, then take a step back, figure out who that ideal client is, and set the framework, set the baseline for how you want this to work and who you want to get in front of, and do it right from the beginning. That way you're working with your ideal client. You'll still have some frustrating people, but your goal is to get in front of people and bring clients in that fit your value, because those are the people that are going to pay, right? Because they see the value in it. So before we move on to the next slide, I think I did see a question. Let's see. I'm not and have never been in public practice. I'm a CFO of a mid-sized company and thinking of leaving the corporate world and starting my own advisory practice, such as fractional CFO services. Is there anything different or additional that I need to consider? So many things. Let me table this for a second, and this may be something that we want to connect on afterward, but I love that you're thinking of this right now, and the outsourced CFO services is so hot right now that it's absolutely a great place to be going into, and I have so many ideas that we could talk about as you go into this, because I have a lot of clients that are doing the same thing. So let me table that, and it may be something that we want to talk about afterward. As you go into, I will say the one thing is you go into the outsourced CFO services, you can say, I'll do this for anybody. And the one thing that I push clients to do is to really, really, really come up with an ideal client persona, come up with that avatar, put a face with your ideal client, give them an age range. You've got to really figure out who that is. And when it comes to outsourced CFO services, what size company are you looking for? Is there an industry that you have particular expertise in? Is there something that you do particularly well in that outsourced CFO role where you can differentiate yourself in the market? But I think casting a wide net and saying I can do this for any business is going to frustrate you, and it's also going to, you're not going to be able to put this is perfect, aligned services in place that are repeatable and that you're going to be able to be profitable on. So that's a fantastic lead into this, is once you know your value and once you know your ideal client, then the other important piece to this puzzle is aligning your services. So you go back to the fact that if you want to be in an advisory practice, you can't be a jack of all trades. You want to figure out what you can do to help your clients, right? So if you're offering outsourced CFO services, what is it about that that's going to bring them value? What's going to make an impact? And they're not going to be able to tell you, I need you to do X, I need you to do Y, I need you to do Z, because all of these things are going to change my life. You having the expertise of working, in industry, or you having the expertise of working with a ton of clients on this, you're going to be able to educate them on what services they need. So I highly recommend having a handful of packages, right? Like I mentioned, the new business formation package, right? That the first year of business, that way you have a starting point and you can talk to your clients and say, look, ideal client that fits into this, area of expertise. There's 3 different ways that I can provide you value. There's 3 different packages or 3 different service levels that we have. Let's start there. Now, absolutely, you can tailor those and customize them to fit the needs of your clients. But it's important, once you know your value, how are you going to package that? How are you going to sell that to your clients? And how are you going to provide them that value? So thinking about the services you provide and what the value is there is an important part of it. So then, once you know your ideal client, once you have all this in place, this is where you really, really, really have to become intentional with finding those prospects. So I was always told when I was in public practice, just go out there and network and make relationships, build these relationships, and then you'll end up getting referrals, and it's all about who you know, and it's all about these referrals. And that worked in the past. And it still will work for your traditional compliance-based services, because everybody needs a tax return, or a lot of people need audits or compilations or reviews. These are pretty standard type things, but those aren't areas of specialty. And so your advisory services, where you've nailed down your value and it's all about your expertise, well, you can't control the referrals that are sent to you for the most part. So getting a ton of referrals that don't fit your ideal client isn't going to help you in the long run. You're gonna spin your wheels, you're gonna bring in clients that don't fit. And so it's important to take a step back and start thinking about, okay, if I know who my ideal client is, and if I know what services I want to provide, how can I find these people? How can I get in front of them? And how can I attract the right clients to me so that I'm building the right type of practice, right? And I've said right about 7,000 times, so I'm really sorry about that. I just caught it. All right, so when we think about prospects, and this gets into sales terms, don't get too caught up into this, but they really fall into two buckets. You've got warm prospects and you've got cold prospects. And we always, always, always start with our warm prospects, because these are people that know or like or trust you, right? And these are the people that it's easier to have the conversation with, because they're already aware of either their problem or you as a solution. There's a base to work with there. And the easiest warm clients are going to be your current clients that fit your ideal client profile, right? So you should have some current clients that fit your ideal client profile that maybe you aren't offering services to yet, that you could go out and start pitching them. And because they're already your current client, because they already know the value you provide, because you already have that relationship, those are going to be your easiest wins. And so when people are starting this process, I always want you to get some of those quick and easy wins. So you want to start there. You want to start with someone who is a current client, or maybe your firm does a good job with leads. So maybe you've got leads coming in from a marketing event or a speaking engagement or something like that. Those are going to be your warm prospects as well. And then the other place that I tell people to look is, those one-off consulting engagements. Did you help someone with a business formation last year? Could they, use some additional services at this point? So think about people that have engaged you to do one-off services, and those are also warm prospects as well, assuming that they had a good experience with you. The second one, cold prospects, this is really where you're going to set your firm up for success. So these are people that you've identified that fit your ideal client profile, but you don't have a relationship with them yet, right? So they're people that don't know you, but you know them because you found them. So let's say that you want to work with manufacturing clients because that's your area of expertise. Well, instead of taking whatever lead comes your way from these networking events, you can use that ideal client profile to find clients that likely need your services. And then you figure out your outreach and nurture strategies to get in front of those prospects. And you want to warm them up to eventually become clients. So maybe you do work with manufacturing companies. Is there an association or a small group in your town or in your state that you could, get involved in, that you could come in and do a speaking engagement? It's all about, once you know that ideal client, it's all about figuring out where they are and going there, right? It's all about getting in front of them. And it's about becoming intentional. There's a couple other pieces that play a factor in developing this advisory practice when it comes to your clients. And one of those is executing on client service. So you've got the prospects, you've got the clients, you've got the values and vision, but the most important success factor is client service. And this happens on the front end and on the back end. So a lot of people think, as they're working with prospects and they're trying to get them signed, they really do a great job of providing service and being responsive and being engaged. But then when they get signed on, okay, great, we'll do the work now, we'll do the deliverables. Well, if you're trying to build an advisory practice, that's built on relationships. So you can't just have a conversation with these people twice a year if that's when you're delivering stuff for them. It needs to be an ongoing relationship. And so firms need to take a step back and think about what their plan is to execute client service. What does good client service mean to you? And then making sure that everyone involved in the process knows what that is and knows the expectations, so that it's consistent across the firm, and that you're making sure that whether or not they're a prospect or a client, you're still delivering that exceptional service that's going to keep them coming back year after year. Another big piece to this is active listening, and we could talk for days on this. This is a whole nother course in and of itself. But active listening, most people listen to respond. They don't listen to understand. And so uncovering opportunities with prospective clients or with current clients, it's all about asking questions and listening. And it's a lot of people, listen to respond. So they ask them what their goal is for next year. And their goal is, they start to say, well, I want to become more profitable. Well, they just hear profitable and they're like, I can help. We've got something we can do, blah, 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 and dive right into it. Whereas if you're involved in active listening, someone says they want to become more profitable, you say, tell me more. What does that mean to you? And you get them going and get deeper and deeper and deeper into the conversation to figure out, and at that point you actually have your client or prospective client tell you exactly what they need, so that they'll become your client and that you can deliver that service. So engaging in active listening and learning more about that, I highly recommend if you're going to go into advisory services. And then one other piece of advice is, if you're going into something like this, even if you're not, I think every accounting firm should be using a CRM. A CRM is going to help you on so many levels, whether that's from the beginning, keeping track of your prospects, keeping track of those interactions, keeping all kinds of notes. Because if you're trying to develop a relationship and you don't talk to someone for a couple months, you're not going to remember the last conversation. I am consistently taking notes. I had a conversation with someone this morning who was telling me about his 3 daughters. One's an architect, one works for Home Shopping Network. I wrote all of this down so that the next time we talk, I can ask about his daughters, because he made it a point to talk to me about them in the first time. And it's making those little connections and tracking all this helps you build those relationships. And then using a CRM helps you track all these prospects that you have. It helps you keep track of every interaction. It helps keep you up to date in terms of managing the process. And then it can also be used for client service after they're signed on as a client, because you can keep track of all those touch points. If your staff's talking to someone, if you're talking to someone, all of that information is in there, and it helps communication significantly when firms use this. And that brings us to polling question number 3. So I'll let you pull that up, Catherine. What was the most valuable part of today's webinar? And you do not have to share this later. I just always like to get insight into what went well. So how mindset affects building an advisory practice, finding right types of clients to build an advisory practice, I'm not sure, it might be helpful down the road, but not now, or the CPE credit. And I'm sorry, I keep looking away. You all, we have got a fly in our house, and I don't know if anybody else experiences this, My kids leave the doors open all the time. And this fly has been haunting me for like 3 days. And I just heard the buzz. I'm like, where is that fly? So if I just randomly jump up and smack something before we finish today, I'm trying to get this fly that has been tormenting me for days now. All right. So we finished that poll. So let's jump in to the end. Oh goodness. Sorry, just checking our Q&A again, making sure we're good. All right. So to wrap things up, just a couple things that, I want to leave you with as you start looking at the advisory practice, okay? So first, you want to make sure for any services you provide, you define the scope of your advisory practice of those services, right? This is huge because advisory services are a little different than your normal compliance services. It's not just a tax return deliverable. Are you providing financial statements and profitability consulting like we talked about earlier? If so, you've got to determine what that interval is. Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? What are you going to do so that you can set expectations so your client knows what's expected, what they're going to get, and you know what's expected of you. The other piece to the deliverables is when you're outlining these packages, I found a lot of accountants really like to include some of those advisory conversations in there, and that's a game changer because if you can include so much in terms of conversations, you're setting an expectation of, look, you can call me 5 times over this course, over this period of time, and that's included in your package. And then they know that if they call you after that, they're going to get a bill for it, but then you're also including that time in your package as well. So this has been kind of a game changer for a lot of accountants because then they can include that time in these advisory packages. Second to defining your scope is properly billing for these advisory services. So when you transition into these advisory roles, you really don't want to hold on to that hourly billing. You want to look at value billing because you're billing more than just your time. You're billing your expertise. You're billing, the 20 years that you've been in practice and you've built this up. I mean, I saw a quote the other day. It's like, I'm not billing you for this hour of work. I'm billing you for the 20 years that it took me to gain the knowledge that I'm giving you in that hour, right? And so that makes a big difference. So when you think about this, you want to look at what it's going to take to provide these services. Yes, you want to cover your time, but when you present it to your client, you want to present it in a way that you're presenting all this value, and then, it costs them X amount of dollars over the course of the year. Maybe you bill it quarterly or monthly or semi-annually, but they're paying for an entire package. You're not saying, I'm giving you 6 hours at this many dollars and 4 hours at this many dollars. You really build up that value so that when you get to the total price of what you're charging them for, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's that cheap. And I promise you, that has been said on multiple occasions. If you build up the value, you can have that response. And then lastly, it all needs to be relationship based. So in order for this to be successful as a long-term strategy, you need the clients to come back year after year. And they're only going to do that if they feel like they're getting more value out of the relationship and out of the services that you're providing and the advice that you're giving than they're paying in fees. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you are communicating on an ongoing basis, that you're keeping clients happy, and that you immerse yourself in the relationship and invest yourself in the outcome of their business so that they see you as someone who is in it with them. So you just really, really, really want to make sure that you're positioning yourself as their trusted advisor, because if your clients are successful because of those services you're providing them, then they're going to stick with you long term. And then what's even nicer is if you build these relationships up and they love the value you're providing, then they're going to become your biggest cheerleader and they're going to drive more of your ideal client to you as well, which is what we all want. So with that being said, this is, it is a big transition. So don't think of this as like a flip of the switch. I'm going to start adding advisory services. It's all going to, just adding this to my practice. You want to start with your mindset shift and think long and hard about what value you provide. And then once you know that, then you need to think about what clients will benefit from that value and how you can remain profitable by providing those services. When you have your value, your clients, and your aligned services nailed down, that's when you're going to be ready to hit the ground running and get out in front of your ideal client to start building this advisory practice. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information up on the screen. Before we jump into the last polling question, I did want to mention the Prospecting and Lead Nurture Bootcamp that I mentioned earlier. I think Catherine has an email coming out about this Friday, tomorrow. We went over this before. I'm like, tomorrow is Friday. But what it is our Prospecting and Lead Nurture Bootcamp is a 4-month program that is basically how to kickstart your advisory practice. It's all about determining your value. It's all about figuring out who your ideal client is. It's all about how do we get in front of them? How do we find these people? And how do we start bringing them into our practice? So we've got a test group going on right now that's been in it 2 months that has had amazing feedback. They absolutely love it. It's very slow paced, meant to be included in, with the work you're doing. It's a total of 4 hours CPE credit. It's self-paced. So you have a video that's about 10 to 15 minutes that you watch each week, and a little bit of homework to do in terms of a workbook and figuring out how you're going to use that information. And we do a call once a month, and it's all on a platform where everyone engages in the community and you learn from each other. And it's really, truthfully, it's a fun experience. And you'll get to the point at the end of it where you've really got your value nailed down and you're bringing in the right types of clients. And it's really going to set you up for success. So if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer them. My contact information's up there. For whoever was anonymous that popped up about, thinking about starting an advisory practice, reach out, schedule time with me. I'd love to talk about it. We've got so many people going through that right now. But other than that, I will let Catherine pop up the last polling question. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time with me today. And even with my crazy fly swatting, I still hear it. But I hope you got something valuable out of this, and I look forward to talking with each of you after the session if you want. Oh, we got a chat.
Hi, thank you for another great webinar. Really appreciate that. And if you guys have any questions about the bootcamp, feel free to shoot me an email, or Ty as well. I could give you your contact information if you need it. And for those who registered for the previous webinar that got rescheduled, it will now be on August 4th, and you can register for that on our website as well. And just let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Cindy Lou. I hope I will feel better. I appreciate it. I'm going to hopefully stop sneezing. Go take some allergy medicine.
All right, Ty, it looks like everyone's voted for it. So I'm getting in that polling, and I can share the results with you later if you'd like, so you can look at that.
Perfect. And then I appreciate everybody, and let me know if you guys need anything. I'm writing down something from our chat right now.